Here. So hello, everyone, and welcome to our roundtable discussion, Applying AI to Fixed Income Portfolio Management. I'm Duncan Rowland, the CEO of Migrations.ml, and we are very pleased to be hosting this event. I'm now going to turn it over to our moderator, who's one of our key advisors, Jay Vyas. Jay, over to you.
All right. Hey, thanks, Duncan, and thanks again to everybody for joining us for today's discussion. And before we get started, I'd like to give a special thanks to our host, Migrations.ml, for putting together this cool event. The topics of AI and of fixed income are certainly not new on their own, but together they form a relatively unexplored area of modern investing. And here to guide us through this unexplored territory today, we're fortunate to have 4 panelists, and they all have very deep industry experience and knowledge, as well as a willingness to share their insights with us. Very quickly, they are Kristina Fan, the co-founder and CEO of 7Chord, Adrien Grimal, managing director at SIA Partners, Matthew Dixon, assistant professor at the Illinois Institute of Technology, and Richard Jardim, the chief information officer at CIBC. I've kept these intros very brief so that we have maximum time for our discussion, but I'd encourage everybody to take a look at their full biographies on LinkedIn. So with that, let's dive right in. The subject of artificial intelligence has certainly been front and center for some years now, and lots of organizations may be, in fact, experiencing some type of FOMO when the topic comes up, which leads us to ask, is AI for everybody? Kristina, maybe we'll start with you. What are some signs that an organization may not be ready, and let's take it from the other side, may not be ready for AI, or maybe does not need to pursue AI-driven trading strategies?
Sure. That's actually a very good question. I think that the starting point should really be sort of a business problem, right? And AI could be one of the tools in kind of one of the weapon in your arsenal, but it doesn't have to be the first thing you go to. And to us, we see kind of a clear distinction between machine learning and something more familiar, like certain mechanistic models that in many situations are perfectly fine. And I think that the other, you should always choose the best tool for the problem. In cases where the relationship between different variables are known, perhaps a traditional model is perfectly fine. But if they're not known, perhaps maybe you would go to AI or to a machine learning system. So, discussions like that with the business stakeholders should be had before the decision is made. The other thing to note is that, we see a lot of firms that are not set up to accept that sometimes you will look for a solution and it will not work out. So you look for a signal and it won't yield success. So you have to account for the fact that it is an experimental process, and if the culture of the firm is able to handle this, that's great. If not, then perhaps maybe this is not the right way to go.
Okay, thank you. Adrien, maybe building on that a little bit and taking the other side, then what are some signs that an organization actually may be ready to use AI for its fixed income trading and investment strategies?
Yes, definitely. That's a point that should be analyzed at organizational level. So of course we have to tackle business problem, but the organization overall has to be ready for that. So when we do such kind of assessment, the way we are doing it is like we foresee like 4 main pillars that we assess the maturity: people, governance, data management, and technical assets, technical infrastructure. On the people side, as you said, Kristina, if the acculturation of the organization is well done on this problematic, so that is kind of innovative, you have the right to fail, but you have to keep on going. That's the kind of see that we are looking into the maturity of the organization. And also on the people side, you have to assess the skills and the upskilling process that you have within your organization. Those are key points to have for an organization which is ready. Second point is the governance, the overall organization. Is it well defined to ensure the implementation of the data strategy and its application to the organization? Of course, the operating model, the process that enables the emergence of the value around the data. And of course, one major point is legal and ethics. Do I have all the measures in place so I'm sure that I'm complying with the regulation? And of course, with all the ethics behind the use of the data. The third pillar is data management. So data quality. Do I manage my quality the right way? Data collection. Do I structure the data well? And security, of course, is that all well secured? And the last point, but not the least, of course, is the IT technical architecture, data architecture, and all the mapping, the lineage around the data. So those are the key points that we assess. And if we're good in those domains, then you are indeed ready to apply analytics, advanced analytics on your processes.
Oh, fantastic. I love frameworks, and you just gave us a framework for thinking about that. So thank you. So as we talk about readiness, it's in addition to sort of the technical and the people capabilities, there's got to be, I assume, a willingness to do this. And Richard, you know, what are you seeing in terms of attitude or openness to this at the C-suite of organizations? What do people at that level need to see in order for them to fund these types of approaches? Are there any deal killers or any landmines we should watch out for?
Well, there's always deal killers. So I would say, first of all, I've just sort of thread the needle between what Kristina said and what Adrien said. You know, on the one side, you have to have, you know, a fit for purpose value proposition here. What are you trying to solve for? And I think, you know, you go down the AI path, and if that's not crystal clear, then you shouldn't be going anywhere near AI. So you need to have that sort of fit for purpose and business value that you're trying to achieve through leveraging AI. The second piece is, I totally agree with Adrien, you really have to have a fairly mature risk and control framework and governance framework, and especially with the new privacy rules coming in, you know, Bill C-11 in Canada, others, like, you know, leveraging AI, you know, our clients start to have the transparency of what we're doing with the data, or if we're using AI on data that is, you know, their data, so to speak, client data, et cetera. So we, you know, we do things at CIBC around client insights on our online banking that leverages a form of AI. You know, we use it on the fraud side, where we use some patterning and AI tooling to look at fraud. So we're a little bit more defensive, mixed with some client enhancement capability with AI. But I think from a bank perspective and the C-suite, I would say AI is absolutely part of a strategy now at any of the big banks and corporations. Like you can't have a strategy without leveraging it. The question becomes, where do you use it? How do you use it? And I can tell you, you know, from a regulatory environment point of view and a controls point of view, you need to make sure you have scalability as well. So as we implement certain AI tooling and ecosystems, let's call it, in pockets of the bank, you have to make sure it's scalable and resilient and has the quality architecture you need. And then you have to be solving a problem. And also you have to have an organization that's willing to adapt. So you're gonna, you know, just like AI learns, right? We learn leveraging AI tools and building out these ecosystems. And so we have a little bit of a different focus with the scalability and the resiliency we require and the sophistication of controls around it. But I would say that, you know, part of the strategy we have a big transformation strategy at CIBC, like many of our peers. AI and data and analytics is one of our pillars, like a 100%. So it's here to stay, and you have to have that part of your strategy. But there's a lot of things to trip over, so you got to be a little bit careful. But it's really exciting actually to work in the space.
Is there an openness to experimentation? So trying small thing. Oh, okay, go ahead, please.
So I was going to, you know, so the second part I got to your question is, how do we look at funding? How do we look at initiating some of these engagements? And I would say on the cap market side, for example, definitely much more untapped. in many banks with respect to leveraging AI in the cap market space. I think there's absolutely a place for it. We do engage, for instance, with fintech and other smaller niche providers, including AI folks, around doing some POCs. And sometimes that engagement is just to learn. Sometimes it's to help understand how we can leverage a certain capability. So absolutely, we do that, but it's generally in a POC control fashion, and then we would scale it from there. And again, there's a huge amount of learning that you want to keep momentum on in the AI space. So I think you can't just look at the big IBM Watsons and some of these sort of bigger platforms. You have to be playing in some of these niche spaces as well. And some of the smaller niche capabilities are not going to end up becoming something that can be scaled in a much more meaningful way. So I would say newer, definitely, if I speak for CIBC, on the cap market side, it's something that's probably a little bit more untapped, but across the bank, we do engage with fintechs and other small niche firms around POCs on some of these types of things with the right controls.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So this has been great to set the stage. So now let's assume that an organization has decided, yes, we're going to pursue an AI-driven portfolio management or trading strategy. What are the critical steps required to build this out successfully as a trading team and as a trading strategy? Matthew, maybe you want to give us your insights on this?
Yeah, so I think I'll speak to both team composition and also to workflow, and we'll get into some details that I think will echo some of the previous comments. So on team composition, I think there's definitely the need to find a balance. There's going to be in any group typically some tension between fundamental and more of a technical, pure quant stats background. And I think when you look at the job market and the skills that are out there to be able to implement a lot of these solutions, I'm not just talking about off-the-shelf tools. I'm really talking about getting into the weeds of tailoring these strategies and deploying them in real-time environments. There's going to be a lot of sort of Silicon Valley sort of centric thinking around this that doesn't map well into finance and the way of thinking. And so I think you need that sort of pushback from those with more of a traditional finance background, that have that more traditional training, understand the issues with fundamentals, understand the nuances with the data that you just can't get with an algorithm. On the other hand, the technical barriers to some of these implementations is pretty high. And so you do need that sort of tech culture as well embodied in your trading team. Now, on workflow, I think there's a couple of dirty secrets that I think aren't discussed enough, from the engine room. And one is that ML is very time consuming. I think everyone wants it to work so badly that they're prepared to sort of, overlook this. But there's an awful lot of complexity, and with complexity comes propensity for failure. And I think you've got to be prepared for a litter of over-engineering solutions, to get you kind of up, started. And oftentimes what is needed is often quite simple. And there's definitely this kind of plug and chuck out of the box, sort of culture with AI. And you're going to find that, those sort of, that approach probably doesn't work well, or it works until it breaks. And you really need to know what you're doing. You can't just sort of base your expectations around how it works over, say, the first month or two. And I think the last point I want to make is around institutional advantage. I think a lot of prop trading firms, smaller shops, that think, not sure I want to go into this because, this is really an institutional, game. This is something for the big institutional shops that can hire the top talent and so on. I see those as actually having a disadvantage. If you look at the big shops, Citadel, Two Sigma, just to name a few, the way that they structure their AI sort of workflow is very siloed, and they segment execution from alpha generation. And I think you need to really tackle those things together. I'll maybe say a little bit more about that, but you can't think about alpha without thinking about execution, and that's something that I think is definitely a problem in these larger institutions.
Wow. So this is not sort of just a technical issue or a coding issue. We're really talking about culture and organizational design. It's serious topics here. So thank you for that. Kristina, as when we were talking before this panel, you've mentioned that AI is not R&D, but it's really an engineering project. Maybe you could expand on that statement and tell us what it really means in terms of how you can be successful in engineering projects.
Sure. I think it really is about the evolution of this space or industry. In the early days of experimentation with some of these machine learning tools or AI tools, I think a lot of the libraries and other infrastructure was built by data scientists for data scientists. So it was really accommodating the research in a space. And as some of this experimentation became more and more successful, then the organizations were ready to deploy some of these tools in production. And then with that came a whole different set of problems. So maintaining AI system in production requires a whole different number of skills and different considerations. So one of the aspects is in the financial industry that's really prominent is the fact that when we do predict anything, really, there's what we call concept drift, right? So there are regimes that change. So you really have to take this into account if you want to have a system that works not just yesterday, but today and tomorrow. And they probably have to be self-adapting. Practically nobody takes that into account because this problem really doesn't reveal itself until you run the system and see the efficacy of it degrade over time. The other thing is that we see this whole segment of ML ops as the enormous growth area specifically because of this. I mean, we are moving into a whole different kind of stage of the stooling and of this industry developing.
Sorry, I was on mute there. Adrien, you've seen a lot in this space. Are you seeing any common themes in the asset management or the hedge fund space regarding the use of AI to earn alpha, and anything to do with skill sets or team composition, teams working remotely in this era? What have you been seeing?
Yeah, we are seeing a lot of common use cases that are applied in this space and in other industries. First is to reach a high level of automation in a smart and efficient way. We want to go fast in the processes and we want to be accurate. So, and in this space, we are trying to analyze a lot of data, a huge amount of data, which comes from different sources, structured, unstructured. And this used to be and still is done by human analysts, but AI can empower all this. And so that's the first place where AI can be applied to reconciliate, check, and correct the data. And this leads to faster processes, accelerate the processes. Second level of use of AI is trying to analyze all this huge amount of data. This huge amount of data is structured, but also unstructured. We have a lot of publication along all the topics, which give signals on companies, sectors, and this can be done automatically speaking by some natural language processes. And on the top of that, you're trying to catch some signals. And of course, that's where AI is good at. And of course, it's very difficult to fine tune because the data is very noisy and I want to catch some very specific signals. And that's why the organization should see that as innovation with the right of failure, but that's where AI can be used. As skill sets and the composition of the team, as Kristina and Matthew said, we have to deliver value in an operational way. It's no more R&D. So I want a team which wrap all those capabilities in one project team. Of course, the core is SMEs. I want people to have deep knowledge in finance and stuff, so you can build up some creative, strategical ideas. Of course, you have all this data engineering part, which is core in those processes, because I want to, at the early stage, build robust pipeline acquisition, preparation of the data. And that's a very complex job, and you have to put a lot of effort in that. Of course, you have the data scientist modeling person. I would not put more than 1 or 2 people in the process, and they have also, of course, have to work closely with the SMEs. And with that comes all the MLOps part, and this is more a role rather than a person, because I want at least my people, data scientist or data engineer, to be able to do that, and not like I'm doing just a block and you keep and you do that in production. No, I want to build the models so they can be used in real life. And last kind of skill set that I want in the project team is some UI UX experts, because I'm handling some very complex data, very complex algorithms, but in the end, I want to take an easy, I want to give an easy insight to the one who has to make a choice. And those people are key to present all this complexity the simplest way as possible, so the overall process is robust and efficient, in fact. So yeah, that's how I would see the teams, the kind of skill set that you have to grab on one kind of project.
Okay, so hearing from everybody so far, we've kind of, I had nothing to do with it. You guys have painted a terrific kind of picture of what's necessary to do this, from the granular and technical to the systemic and kind of organizational design level. I'm going to go a little bit off piste here, because that's just the way my brain works. When I'm hearing this from you guys, I wonder why, as I said at the beginning, this is a relatively new area in fixed income, but not so much maybe in equities or in other kinds of derivatives. Do you guys have any thoughts on what might be the barriers or the frictions that might have led fixed income to relatively lag these other areas? And I'm just opening it up here. And sorry for the surprise. I thought if I was curious, everybody else would be. It could be that the trading's over the counter, perhaps, so you don't have as much data. But if anybody has any.
Probably data is a big factor, but I actually, I don't know if I would agree with that. I mean, I think that there's actually a lot of opportunities for the use of AI and machine learning in fixed income specifically, because specifically for the reasons that you mentioned. I mean, there's actually a lot of problems to solve.
Right.
There are a lot of differentiation between liquid and illiquid securities, and that's really where some of these tools shine. There's a lot of manual tasks, right? So you actually see the industry leapfrogging in the last few years. We actually see most firms upgrading their infrastructure. And maybe that's actually an advantage, and they're going directly to the greatest and latest and greatest tools, as opposed to potentially other areas that where technological advantage where technological development came first, then
Right.
They don't necessarily have a need.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you. So let's move on this kind of idealized world now, like say we've built this diverse, high caliber team and have engineered a strategy, and it's time to actually run this, AI-based strategy. Yeah, how do you get it up and running quickly? And do you need to score quick wins? I think, Matthew, you earlier said, hey, it might not always work in the first month. So maybe you could talk about what you need to do to get this up and running.
Yeah, I think it's a lot like test driving a car, and you look at the fuel gauge, and the first 5 miles you see the fuel gauge not moving, and you think, this might actually be a really efficient car. And if you drive for long enough, you realize that they've essentially sort of biased the fuel gauge, and that I think happens in ML and AI. You get these sort of out of the box solutions, so you get the sense of high productivity out of the gate. But as I said, the snag is in that second phase, which I think Adrien has, Kristina have already alluded to, in that there are complexities which are not so easily to deal with commoditized solutions. So I think, in my experience, the best thing to do is actually to approach this from the opposite sort of end of the spectrum, and actually sidestep ML and AI for a moment, and just get your strategy working with the simplest possible statistical method, whether it's linear regression or some sort of logistical regression, and just get a feel for how sensitive the returns of the strategy are, the P&L that is, to the inaccuracies of the statistical method. And that will give you a sense of what the value add of then going and applying more sophisticated tooling is to that strategy. And you could be wasting your time. You could be finding that it doubling the accuracy of your machine learning algorithm may only lead to a 10% increase in your profit and loss. So all of this can be dealt with under the caveat of limitations of backtesting, of course. But I think you can get some answers very quickly without necessarily needing to go too far down the road into specialist AI tooling. So that's the first point to sort of touch on. And I think, sort of building on that further, I think that the very first thing you should in fact do is not be so methodology focused. I think when you're trying to deploy a strategy, you've got really 3 questions you're trying to answer. Do I have the right data? Am I answering the right kind of questions? Whether it's generating enough P&L, whether it's looking at drawdowns. And the third pillar is methods. I think we tend to get focused on the methods too much. And I think the question you've got to ask always is, how sensitive is my strategy to inaccuracy in the machine learning? And can you dollarize percentage increase in performance of your AI algorithm into the strategy? And I think that will give you a really good sense of the business sort of level pragmatism needed to invest in infrastructure, engineering, tooling, etc., versus gains on the strategy. So I think it's not so frequently spoken about, but I think it's a very pragmatic approach.
And I would just I would add again on top of that is, if I look at what we've done in our case with respect to leveraging AI and some of our data strategies linked to AI, is incremental approach. So even when we're going at scale with something like Watson, which we've done more in the contact centers and all that, which is still put in the AI space, but I think going incrementally, and again, really key up front to have a framework in place even ahead of time, those governance controls, some of the IP you need. Make sure you have a prioritized list of business outcomes you want here, and they could be small little things, right? Start off small. You're going to learn along the way, and no different in the fixed income space, where you're really looking at how some of these will pay off and impact, sensitive to P&L, et cetera. But start off small, go incremental, and then you have to keep ideating on top of that and keep experimenting, and until you get to a point where you can scale a specific piece of that AI into your actual day-to-day production of whether you're running a certain portfolio or book or whatever. And I find that way you're doing it in a controlled way, and you can scale it much more, because the ultimate outcome is you want to have that perfect balance between leveraging AI, which won't replace a whole whack of stuff necessarily. It's going to augment your capability, and we look at it that way. It's about augmenting your capability, right? It's not about replacing a whole bunch of people or a whole bunch of processes. It's just augmenting and optimizing. And in our case, we use it quite a bit, as I mentioned, on the fraud side in defensive strategies around our AI pillar. So I think that works really well. The other thing too is the regulations are changing pretty quickly out in the marketplace, just in general around leveraging AI and all the controls you require. So by going incrementally as well, you're learning along the way, and you can adapt a bit quicker to the regulatory environment, which is going to change a lot as well in the, as everyone knows, in the cap market space too, where that bar keeps getting raised. So it's a good way to go.
All right, that's great. And thanks. So it sounds like you've had some success in different parts of the bank, like such as in this fraud area. But as you mentioned earlier, capital markets is still coming along. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, it's a little bit less developed, as far as leveraging this in the capital market space and
I think I've lost Richard here. It's frozen. So I'm going to move on, and hopefully he comes right back. Adrien, let's go to you. As we think about getting strategies up and running, how do you think about measuring
retail
success?
side and in the risk management?
Okay, so Adrien, how do you think about measuring success, and how do you know if an organization is successful in its use of AI and its trading strategies and portfolio management?
I would keep on what Richard was saying. What I'd like to measure, at an organization level, is the organization working in the right way, and how fast the organization is working or running in this space. So, of course, the first metric that we have to keep in mind, and as everybody said, that AI is here to solve business problems, and so business units have to have the lead on the metrics. But still, the main metric I want to measure is the actual dollars that AI helps to generate. That's kind of basic, but only at the end of the journey, that's what I want to measure. After that, you have some other very concrete KPIs that you can measure at an organization level. So you're checking that the data mindset, I would say, is infusing overall the organization. Like how big is my data catalog? How many use cases are based upon that by the advanced analytics team? Are the business teams using this kind of data catalog to build up their own use cases? How fast am I building the new project? When I'm not so mature with not all the tools I have, then it might take like 6 months to build up a project. Then the maturity goes on. I will go to 3 months, something like that, for the first prototype. And I want to have those kind of measures, whatever the kind of complexity of the use case is, but the mean of the project is still an indication. How many use cases am I tackling at an organizational level? Am I doing more, less? Am I still keep on doing some? That's very important, because I'm learning, I'm failing, but I still want to learn and to do that step by step. And doing like a small use case, a small prototype, or a big one is not such a differentiation. It's a good indicator that I'm doing 2, 3, 4 a month, a year. And of course, I want to measure how you infuse this to the organization. So how many education sessions, programs do I have in place around the organization? So those are the KPIs that I would put in place at an organization level to see if the organization is evolving in the way of being more data-driven. But the main measure is dollars that appears through AI, thanks to AI, on top of what I used to do, because I like the idea of augmenting. I'm not replacing, I'm just doing more, better, faster, in a different way, but it's always on top of what I've used to do.
Right. And as all traders and portfolio managers know, right, it's all about that attribution. So this is right in line. So, with a full acknowledgement that devising successful trading strategies or investment strategies is actually the secret sauce of the best investment management firms, I'm wondering if there are maybe some key considerations, insights, or steps that you could share with the audience regarding the development of these types of strategies using AI. Matthew, maybe I'll throw that out to you.
Yeah, I think I'll cover 4 areas. I mean, first of all, as the other panelists have mentioned, I mean, the data is a significant aspect. So, you're looking at predictive data and asking yourself, could this be a potential source of alpha? And there you have the sort of the keys under the lamppost problem, in that, it's sort of famous story where, everyone, looks where they can find data. And, the chances are that, you're walking back to your car late at night on a Friday night, from the pub, you probably dropped your keys somewhere else. And in the same way with data, if you're looking at that place where everyone else is, you're probably not going to find incremental signal compared to other shops. So you have to be looking at the data in a different way. And that requires potentially accessing new data sets or new ways of sort of parsing existing data. So that's step 1. Step 2, I would say, would be defining what your investment universe is. And there it's very important, of course, to be mindful of crowding and other factors. And the next step, I would say, would be attribution. So being able to look at alpha factors, to be able to tailor the models in such a way that you can extract out the incremental value of the strategy over the market. So you're putting in control factors, momentum factors, price over equity, fundamental factors, and so on. And then I'd say the last area is execution. And that's where you really need to pay attention to things like slippage, to liquidation times, short selling constraints, blah, blah, blah. All of these come into bear. All of these can sizably strip away your ability to generate positive P&L. So all of those 4 things, in principle, of course, I think an excellent book on this area is Finding Alpha by Igor Turchensky, the CEO at World Quant. I think he has a very, very hands-on, pragmatic approach. So I would refer readers to that book.
Great, thank you. Kristina, you've seen a lot in this space, and what have you seen your clients do in terms of these types of strategies where they can get, what have you seen them do that enables them to get ROI from their AI efforts?
Well, first of all, you have to consider kind of their environment we've been living in for the past 2 years. And it's really been kind of the environment of very rapid and radical change. And the truth of the matter is that the pace of change has been accelerating for many years for a variety of reasons, but the intensity with which kind of these business environments and market regimes have been changing has been unprecedented. And so that probably highlighted this issue more than previously in the past. So what we see is that, and feedback from our clients and what works and what doesn't work, any kind of quant method that assumes that the market regime will remain constant will fail eventually. And we see, on the other hand, people who apply, who kind of avoid all regime strategies and apply adaptive approach do much better, and especially in this environment, but also in any environment. So that's true about the, I think, portfolio construction and trading strategies. It's also the principle that we apply when we build a pricing engine with regards to pricing bonds or any other financial instruments. You really have to have a very adaptive system that assumes that your tomorrow will not look like today or yesterday for sure.
Thank you. Thank you. We are running out of time here. And, you know, as I came into this, I thought we might be talking about forests and nearest neighbors and neural nets, as we're going to talk about applying AI to fixed income portfolio management and trading. But, you know, the insights that everybody on the panel has provided show that it's really about data, about culture, about the organizational design, about adaptive systems. So thank you all for sharing these insights. I learned a lot, and I hope the audience did too. There's clearly a ton more we could talk about, but that's it for this session. I'll hand it off back to Duncan now.
Thanks, Jay, and thank you for doing such a terrific job as the moderator. And my sincere thanks to the participants, Kristina, Adrien, Matthew, and Richard. You're all amazing, and I appreciate the time and effort you put into this. And finally, a big thank you to all of our attendees. We really appreciate you tuning in. And if you have any feedback or questions, please feel free to send them to us at info@migrations.ml. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend. Thanks, everyone.